So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and I assume it's okay for me to show this now that the rules have been posted up on both the official channel and I believe J-Monster's channel. This is going to be the first I show of the Conquest game mode. Now, before we get going, it is going to be important for me to explain the rules here as well, just in case you haven't seen those videos, but I do recommend going to watch them first because they are obviously in-depth. It's the introduction to the mode itself, so there will be a link in the description below for that, but I will go over them here as well, at least in a sort of more shortened format so that we can get onto the battle as well. Now first things first, the armies themselves are going to be noticeably different. The meta that surrounds this mode is going to be very different from what you are used to, and this is good because I think the established meta in the game at the moment has become a little bit samey. You know, most of the battles I show tend to work out in very similar ways depending on what armies are on the field, whereas this is going to force people out of their comfort zone, which I like. I feel as though that is going to be a good thing, and this comes mainly down to the restrictions placed on what armies you are able to bring. The funding is actually relatively similar to standard game mode, so you'll get 13 or 14k depending on sort of what the map is, how many players there are, etc, etc. But however, you are limited to only 800 men per army, so you do have to sort of ration it out. You cannot, if you're playing as the orcs or the evil men, for example Harad or Rune over here, won't be able to just spend money on tons and tons of lower tier units and just try and overwhelm the enemy, because that will not work, because you are restricted with the amount of men you can have. Now it is worth saying that the unit scaling is on lowest as well, so that does sort of make up for that a little bit. It makes it possible to play as some of the orcs, for example. If you had it on highest and you played as Angmar, you'd only be allowed like 5 or 6 units if you were lucky. So this is obviously to make it so it's actually possible. Obviously on lowest as well, and with the restrictions, these Mumakil over here only count as 2 unit models, I believe, or it might be the archers as well on top, but stuff like the Mumakil and the trolls, of course, don't impact into your total manpower count very much. So you may very well be seeing very troll-heavy armies from the orcs, depending on what faction you're playing as, or obviously the Mumakil are going to be very, very deadly, but there are only 2 of them, so if you do come across stuff like very heavily anti-cavalry pikes, or stuff like the very deadly throne units, stuff like the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers or the Balchol Sapphire Bladesmen, the Mumakil will be wiped out even more easily than they would otherwise be. In fact, the Mumakil count as a 30-man unit there. So that's really the restrictions there. Now, there will be 3 to 4 players on each team because almost all of the maps are very large. This one, I believe, is called Blood Gulch. So I think it's actually inspired from the Halo map of the same name. That's going back a little bit now. But all of the maps for this game mode are going to be relatively large, so you will need at least 3 people per team like on this, but 4 people would probably be even better. As for the actual game mode itself though, it's not just a case of trying to wipe each other out. Obviously, you know, complete and total victory is possible in that way, but there is a little bit more emphasis on defending certain points and certain strategic areas. So for example, if you see over here, this building over here is going to be our stronghold, and there is one on the other side as well, which we'll go and have a look at in a moment. If you lose control of this stronghold, picture it as a town centre in many ways. You might as well call it a town centre because it will serve a very, very similar purpose to what it does in sieges. If you lose control of your town centre, a 2-minute timer will start, and then if at the end of that 2 minutes, if you have failed to try and retake it, the enemy team will win. It's going to be the same over here, so that's our stronghold, and this is the enemy one up here. So the final rule to note with regards to the strongholds here is that each player on each team needs to commit 3 units of their army to initially defend the checkpoint. Now you can move them when the battle starts. You need to sort of start them off here, and obviously you will need to move some of them, so some units will have to move into place and then leave. But this is kind of to ensure that you can't just rush down your opponent. You know, I'm not really sure the exact ins and outs of that rule exactly, but the point is that you have a garrison force that are going towards the maintenance of your castle, so to speak, and then you can move them off the point here. So for example, I've got my garrison force of Dragon's Wrath Warlords, Dragon's Wrath Crossmen, and Balchol Sapphire Bladesmen, but I am free to move them off into the battlefield as I see fit. But without further ado, let's take a look at the army compositions, at least what I can see, because to be fair, a lot of the units are going to be hidden. We'll go through my army though, because amazingly enough, I'm actually playing in this one, so, you know, shock horror, I know. But I'm playing as Rune, and I've got some Variag mercenaries up here, so they are a little bit more of a skirmish-focused archer. In this sort of situation, you cannot rely on numbers purely to win you the skirmish fight, which will be a big departure, I think, from what we're used to. In standard battles, you know, most of the time it's going to be quantity of archers which is going to win you the fight. Not so here. I do also have some E-Strong Crossmen with the armour upgrade. It's worth saying that with the funds you're given, in conjunction with the limited manpower, you're often going to be able to upgrade your units fully. So that is something that's worth saying as well. Factions with a lot of armour upgrades, for example, will be quite powerful in this sense. I do have one unit of E-Strong Clansmen, although it is worth saying that I did not bring lots of them because they would eat into my total allowed manpower count quite a lot. But in the end I did decide to bring one unit of them, of course with both levels of armour upgrades as well. I've got some Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen over here. Again, you can expect to see all of the elites on display here, as well as 2 units of Loka Flagrim up here for the additional AP. And for even more AP, I've got 2 units of Carmel's Shadow Guard. I've also got a unit of cavalry up here just in case my opponent has put some cavalry in the trees up here. I've got some E-Strong Clan Chiefs, Spear Cavalry of course, and the only other unit I have up here, I believe, is this unit of Carmel's Shadow Bows. Excuse me while I just try and fix my mouse. I think my mouse is on the way out, which is unfortunate, but hopefully it will at least last through the rest of this battle. Now I've got another unit of Variag Mercenaries down here. I'm going to be helping my ally move up through this central lane over here, as well as Flagrim, and of course the very, very powerful Carmel's Dragon Knights. And obviously on my team I have WK, who is playing as Harad. He's got a couple of units of Southron Warband, a unit of Haradrim Spearmen. We've also got some Champions of Nathrat, Trollmen, and Demons of the Desert. Of course, we can expect to see every elite on each team. Southron Warband, and then of course the very powerful Mumakil, which in this sort of situation can be absolutely devastating. We'll see how well they are used. And then back here we've already seen, of course, my garrison force of Warlords, Crossbows and Sapphire Bladesmen. Similar story back here for Harad as well. They've got the Black Serpent Bodyguards, and then a couple of well, I think that's 2 units of Southron Pikemen, indeed it is. And then finally, the final player on our team is going to be Sin of the Dark. Oh no, we've got 2 units of Mumakil from WK. So that's going to be interesting. They're going to be over here, obviously a real menace, worth spending all that money on perhaps. We also have Sin of the Dark Cloud, who is going to be playing as Umbars. We've got some Narun Aru Sentinels, some Numenorian Lancers and some Warlords of Umbar, which are going to be his garrison force as they scuttle across the field. He's also got some Corsair Pikemen, but a lot of his forces are hidden, so it's going to be a little bit difficult to tell. He's got Blackguards, Crossbow Corsairs, more Blackguards, more Crossbow Corsairs, and he's got some units hidden in the trees as well. But actually telling there's some Aztec architecture there. Here we go. So we've got some Castamir's Legion, Abrazani. They're all just hidden in the trees. Now, what I can see of the enemy armies I will show. So we've got Grim, or Grimgor as I believe he used to be called. Is going to be playing as Cardlan, facing off essentially against me initially. We've got some Hearthguard of Amon Sultan, and he's got a plethora of hidden units in here consisting of stuff like pikes and rangers and etc. Down here we have his cavalry force, which is Dunedain Commanders and Tharbad Riders, obviously very good shock cavalry there. And he also has his garrison force, which is going to be again scuttling across the field of Tharbad Warhammers, Minas Tirithlan Sharpshooters, and the Royal Court of House Thorondor. And the central army, which is going to be Dale, played by Raven of Korriban. He's got some Dalian cavalry, and his army is mostly out in the open, so we'll be able to see quite a lot of his forces. We've got some Bardian marksmen, some Dalian spearmen, some Dalian cavalry, obviously Earls of Esgaroth making up the centre of his line because of all that money he has to spend. Earls of Dale, and then we've got some Blackshot Dragon Slayers back here, in addition to some Girian's Paladins and Morroquendi Pikes, and then I believe his garrison force is just back here, Morroquendi Pikes, Barding Herd, and Morroquendi Bows. The final army is going to be played by J Monster, who I'm not sure who first thought of this game mode, but I'm tempted to say it was him. I don't want to take the credit away from someone else, so don't quote me on that. He's going to be playing as Mirkwood, and obviously the elves in this sort of battle are going to be very, very effective because their philosophy of quality over quantity really does help them in this sort of situation, because everyone is going to have around the same unit counts, so their units become very, very powerful in this situation. The Hiri Alth in particular are probably going to be the best single infantry unit on the field today. The Castamir's Legion are good, but maybe not quite as good as the Woodland Realms infantry. Obviously a lot of highly skilled units here. Hiri Peng, Thrandrami Erin as well as spearmen are going to be very difficult to break down, as well as the Maitha Ilaz Gelen, more Hiri Alth, and then just over here I believe we've got some more as well. And then finally, well, the final units that we can see are going to be the 2 units of Roy Ekbin Amon Lank, which he has brought, of course, very powerful, very skillful spear cavalry. Now, obviously, Merc would have got a lot of hidden units. I know that there's a lot of Thurn E Tower and Hethel E Tower hidden around here, of course. Now, without further ado, just as we get onto the cliffs over here, let's begin. So it's going to be a very different feel. It's almost, well, the description that was given in this map, but it's almost like a tabletop game where you have to move around your units, and it's going to be very different to how things work out in a normal fight. Obviously WK is going to be punching right up the middle here with his Mumakil. I'm going to support him as well with my Carmel's Dragon Knights, and I'm also going to send up my Dragon's Wrath Warlords, Dragon's Wrath Crossbows and Balchor Sapphire Blades. I'm going to go right through the middle here because they have very limited defences over here. And I've also got my Variag Mercenaries and my Loka Flagrim down here. Now, just having a cursory glance over the field, the lack of Cardland units back here kind of led me to believe that the vast bulk of Grimgor's army was up here. And because of the units that I've left behind, a lot of my very powerful stuff, I didn't really fancy my chances at going through here. But I did in the end decide to move my army up, or at least the main bulk of my army up here, through the trees into what was undoubtedly the waiting Cardland defences, mainly because I needed to engage them so that we could then go in from behind and try and attack them from the rear with a lot of WK's forces. A rear charge from my Knights and WK's Mumakil into a surrounded Cardland force in the trees up there, for example, would be utterly devastating for them. Harajan Spearmen moving very quickly towards Cardland. They need to be careful actually because a single charge would be all it takes really to do a lot of damage over there. Meanwhile, Dale and Mirkwood still just sort of moving around relatively slowly. You can see that the gap between Sin, Dale and Mirkwood over here is going to be very, very large. So the first engagements almost certainly are going to happen between myself and Cardland, along with the support that I'm going to receive from the Haradrim. Harad, of course, moving up very, very quickly. We can see the Black Serpents have also moved up quickly. My Flagrim moving into position as well as my Dragon Knight. So it is a pretty scary force coming up the middle here. And there is very little in the way of a defensive force to actually stop them. You can see how quick the Black Serpents are, one of the real selling points of their army. Still, I'm not really sure where the Carbon forces are. I could, of course, see over here the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, because the General's unit cannot hide. So I knew there was an army up here, because you're never going to just leave your General high and dry like that. And this of course means that the defences around here are almost certainly going to be of a more limited nature, which is going to be good for us because it means that we can take our position on this side of the river with the bridges and start to try and hem them in. And map positioning on this mode is going to be quite critical. And Cardland are a little bit isolated from their allies over here. You know, a lot of the Dalian forces are across the river, so are a lot of the Mirkwood forces. Now this does of course mean that Sin might have to deal with a two-pronged assault, and there are a lot of river crossings down here. I think there are 8 in total. There are 6 bridges and 2 solid land river crossings. Meanwhile, the first of the Cardland forces did reveal themselves. You can see that these rangers up on the hill obviously took up a good position, had the same idea as my Carmel's shadow bows, but I immediately saw this and decided that it was too good a target to pass up, so I will charge in with my Eastron clan chiefs and try and do as much damage to the rangers as possible, because the rangers of course in this game mode, considering the more limited nature of all of the units, can be exceptionally damaging. So trying to deal with them early is going to be a big deal. I'm not going to be able to finish off the rangers entirely, and there are going to be more Cardland forces in the trees, so a couple of my horses do go down, but forcing the rangers into a retreat is going to be more important because they're not going to be able to stay there with the pressure that my cavalry is putting on them, which of course means that our forces are free to advance down here on the lower ground without being harassed by the Dunedain rangers. There is of course the Cardland cavalry back here, which could potentially be very dangerous, but we also have my cavalry, we have WK's cavalry as well with the Black Serpents, Variag Mercenaries and the like. However, the advance is happening. I'm going through the trees at this point. I didn't really fancy my chances in a head-on assault because I knew that a lot of Cardland's infantry power would be up here. In fact, nearly all of it is up here, other than the garrison force he sent over to their stronghold. And this, of course, means that they have a very powerful skirmish presence as well. They've got Miniscarithan archers, the sharpshooters, and the Hearthguard of Amon Sul. This is going to be an absolute nightmare for me to try and punch through. However, if I can just get them to all target the same unit of Variag Mercenaries, this is going to free up the rest of my infantry to continue to move forwards. See here, the Eastron clansmen are going to be leading the way, the Flagrim and the Cardinal's Shadow Guard. So despite the fact that I'm probably going to be outnumbered up here, I do have the advantage of Rune's strength of armour piercing being very useful against a lot of the Cardland foot troops. And even the Cardland troops that are not particularly well armoured, like the Greenwatch Garrison footmen, which are over here, if I can catch them out of position, they'll die very, very quickly. Their stats are not particularly high, so that is good for me. You can see over here the continuing bombardment of the crossbows, and now there's another, well, the unit of Miniscarithlin swordsmen, which have revealed themselves, and pikes defending the area. So I've got my flag rim moving in. Again, it's all a matter of me trying to pin Cardland in place. I knew that my army would take a lot of losses, which in this sort of situation is going to be very risky. But I felt like I had no choice, considering the fact that we do have the ability to go around and try and attack in the rear. I did feel pretty good about our chances of surrounding Cardland and destroying his army en masse. And ultimately, as Rune, while the advantages of having a larger army are gone, I do still have a little bit more in terms of sacrificial units like the Eastron Clansmen in comparison to a force like Mirkwood later on. You can see here that the attack is underway. We can see the Thieves of Tharbad are obviously going to destroy the Eastron Clansmen very quickly. However, my Carmel Shadow Guard are going to come up here, and these pikes are in far too thin a formation to stand against an attack like this. So over on this side near the cliff, I'm going to easily win. However, over here I do make my first huge mistake. This is a unit that I should have held back for later, the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. They're far too good to throw away in a situation like this. They're doing damage, but not nearly enough of it. I do have some cavalry running around in the back lines, those Eastron Clan Chiefs. I think I'm going to try and charge into the Dunedain Rangers once again. Just down here you can actually see the Baltroth Sapphire Bladesmen and the Dragon's Wrath Crossmen were actually being harassed by those Dunedain commanders, but fortunately WK was on the ball there with his Black Serpents and quickly chased them off. Let's go and see what's happening on this side of the battlefield. We can see that Raven of Korriban is charging forward with his Earls of Dale. Now, this is a strange choice, considering the Earls of Dale are almost certainly going to be completely overwhelmed by Umbar's cavalry. The Warlords are over here. Now, they are going to charge into the Castamir's Legion, but the Earls of Dale are not shock cavalry, so they are not going to be able to do the sufficient damage to do much to those Castamir's Legion at all, and these Earls are already going to get crushed with the Mumakil on hand. However, having said that, the full force of Dale is coming forward, as well as Mirkwood, so Sin is going to have to sort of set up around these bridges. And that was the Dalian general, so a hideous waste there. But yeah, Dale and Mirkwood do still have a lot of forces coming over here, and Sin is going to be the one outnumbered on this side in a similar manner to how eventually Grim is going to have to deal with units rear-charging his forces as well. Now over here, this unit of Flagrim is of course being completely overwhelmed, but they are holding up a lot of resources over there. A lot of units are committed to trying to kill those Flagrim. But you can see that over here my infantry is continuing to just sort of carve their way through. Actually, there's Dunedain captains over here, which I was very impressed throughout the course of this battle with the performance of my Carmel's Shadow Guard. Obviously there are 2 units of them, but we are completely overwhelming the Dunedain captains, which is good to see. Over here we can see the Dunedain Rangers are firing into my forces, which is unfortunate. But infantry-wise, I am going to lose if I don't receive reinforcements from the rear, but I am sending up. And we can see over here, well, WK is also sending up his Southron Warband, but I've got my Dragon's Wrath Warlords coming around the back, and of course multiple HP Lancers. That's going to be real difficult for Cardland to deal with in this sort of situation, because they're not going to have the resources to peel off and deal with that. Ultimately, however, I probably have taken losses to the point where this advance by me was done a little bit too quickly. Should maybe have waited a little bit more, but obviously in my over-eagerness to engage with the enemy, I've lost a little bit more than I was bargaining for. Now the Eastron Clansmen are going to charge into the Rangers just to stop them from firing. They will lose that fight because of the skill of the Rangers, but ultimately this should be enough to stop them from firing into my men for the time being. You can also see the Carmel Shadow Guard victorious over here, and they are going to charge into the Miniscarithlin Swordsmen and what's left of the Thieves of Tharbad, which are being cleaned up by my Flag Rim. And obviously the Miniscarithlin Swordsmen are going to be destroyed by the Carmel Shadow Guard. Their AP has come in really handy against the more heavily armoured of the Cardland lines so far. And you can actually see over here that Cardland have started to push back against me into my archer forces as well. You can see over here that my Eastron crossbows were engaged in melee with the swordsmen, which is a real bad loss for me. My AP missiles would have been very useful in the late game. We all know how good crossbows can be if you can save their ammunition accordingly. However, at this point now, my Dragon's Wrath Warlords are on hand, and we will start to charge into the rear. So that entire unit of swordsmen has already been destroyed. These Thieves of Tharbad are also being cleaned up as well. The only, obviously, danger is these Greenwatch Garrison footmen. But you can also see the Muma Killer in the background over here. And actually as well, hidden over here on this ridge was the Minotaur Romen Guardians, which WK has surrounded with his lower tier Saltron units, preventing them from firing, so they did manage. Well, Grimm's army was able to get quite a lot of kills against me initially, but ultimately his forces have been dealt with. Both of us have taken some pretty grievous losses at this point in time, however. You can see these Carmel's Shadow Guard continuing to fight. They are a bit outnumbered, but as soon as the support from the Mumakil is forthcoming, we should be able to deal with this situation very nicely.
Only half of our force remains.
So you can see that I've lost half of my forces already. But those Dunedain Rangers now crushed. I do actually have some clansmen left as well, which is nice to see. And now the Dragon's Wrath Warlords, I'm going to cycle back around to try and recharge the Minotaur Rolmen Guardians, and that should be the last of the forces that we'll see over here. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul will be difficult to deal with, but they will be utterly... Also, most of their ammunition is being just buried into the floor, so they're ultimately at this point not too much of a threat.
They have only half their men left.
And that will be Cardlan as well. It's worth bearing in mind as well that both of our garrison forces, including my knights, have not taken any damage yet, so really it's worth saying that at this point in time, myself and Grimm have kind of bled most of our army's manpower off against one another in a section of the map which is ultimately not too relevant to the strongholds that both of our teams occupy. But having said that, our team will still gain map position over here because of the fact that his army will be completely routed, whereas mine will still have some manpower left over here, and I will be able to either advance on the enemy stronghold or fall back to our own and try and defend it. Obviously we are going to need some reinforcements over here to deal with the Minotaur Rolmen Guardians, but now, just having a look on the mini-map, we can see that one of the land crossings is being exploited here by Mirkwood. The realm of Mirkwood coming forward, and the Roy Ekbin Amon Lank doing a lot of nice damage there to the champions of Nafarat. That's a terrible loss for our team, because obviously Harad's strongest infantry here. The Demons of the Desert as well. Now the Demons of the Desert are two-handed spears in melee, so the Roy Ekbin cannot afford to stay there for too long, otherwise they will take some really nasty losses. They are going to come in for another assault, however. Another two-pronged charge, so this is a really awful loss for us, to be fair. So far, Umbar is still just sort of holding position on the other side of those bridges, waiting for the vast majority of Dale's forces to attack. But at this point, we really desperately need to get rid of these Amon Lank. You can actually see that the other unit of Mumakil is over on this side of the river. It's a shame that I moved my Dragon Knights so far forwards. Otherwise, they would have been very useful for at least trying to bog down the Roy Ekbin and then trying to overwhelm them. Now the Trollmen as well are not the easiest thing to take on in melee, and honestly dealing with the Spear Cavalry might be worth it in the long run, but this is still a lot of forces that we've lost, and now we can see that Dale are also committing some infantry units across the river. Let's go and see what's going on over here. The remainder of Cardlan's forces are now slowly but surely being destroyed, although I am now having to send in my Variag mercenaries into the fight. They've used up all of their ammunition, so they are now just going to be used as a sort of makeshift cannon fodder unit. Although at this point, of course, it's only a matter of time before the rest of Cardlan's resistance in these trees has been destroyed. Speaking of which, these Minotaur Rolmen Guardians have been cycle charged into oblivion by my Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Not completely, without taking some damage of their own, but definitely worth it to deal with the Rolmen Guardians. They're such a menace. These Hearthguard of Amon Sul are still alive, but we also still have the Mumakil up in these trees over here. Meanwhile, the main battle now is going to take place over near this river crossing over here. Got some Dalian cavalry over here dealing with what remains of the champions of Nafarat. So they've been diffused largely without the kind of response that would make them worth it. These Roy Ekbin have been somewhat weakened as well. It's actually worth saying as well that WK is crossing the river over here to fight fire with fire. He's going to charge forth and perhaps try and deal with that Dalian cavalry, as well as committing some Southland Warband over there, although the Roy Ekbin are coming over to reinforce as well. So these two river crossings are now the main point of contention. Whoever wins over here now has the centre of the map basically all to themselves, and that is a big ley line that connects both of the strongholds. And so far it's looking like Dale has got a healthy amount of forces, although those Mumakil using their ranged attacks to good effect here. The Barding Herd and the Morroquendi Pikes trying to come forward to deal with the Trollman. Now if the Barding Herd cannot get into formation, the Trollmen will rip through them. That could end up being very, very nasty here for Dale, but they do still have the numbers advantage over here, the Dalian cavalry, some Lake Town River Patrol as well. Sin is also going to be sending over some Abrazani Nadubawi, so a little bit more in terms of range firepower to get into this Dalian blob and start doing some nice damage. Now this was a really questionable decision again by Dale, the Dalian cavalry charging forward.
Our brave warriors have killed our foes.
There goes Cardlin, at the hands of the Boomerkill no less. But yeah, that Dalian cavalry, I don't know whether they thought they could assassinate the Harajam general with a quick charge, but charging forward towards armor-piercing spears and multiple HP lancers with a unit of just basic lancers was maybe not the finest idea. This unit of Dalian cavalry already had taken some pretty nasty losses as well. There's still that Royal Court of House Thorondor from Cardlin, so myself and Cardlin have taken some pretty grievous losses. Cardlin maybe a little bit more so because of the rear charges that they've been taking so far. I still have a serviceable army which I can use to cross the bridges here in the far north of the map, which will then mean that all of the sections of the river crossings will then be occupied by some army or another. You can see in the south there's still a great deal of Mirkwood and Dalian forces getting ready to attack across into Umbar. Over here we can see the Morroquendi pikes managing to deal with the trollmen slowly and surely. The demons of the desert are throwing what remains of their payload into the Morroquendi pikes, and the Abrazani are also over here with their ranged firepower. And it is interesting actually that now Dale are being forced to retreat, so despite the fact they've managed to sort of clean up the trollman units over here, they are still being forced into retreat because of the ranged presence that's over here. Although the resources that Sin has committed over here does mean that it's a little bit more likely that there's going to be an advance over here. Indeed, it looks as though Mirkwood are going to cross the bridges over here to try and deal with Umbar. And of course the skill of the Mirkwood units is going to be difficult for Umbar to match. The Castamir's Legion are good, so they should be able to defeat Thrandrami Erin, but it's the Hiri Alth that I'm concerned about, depending on how many of those they've actually brought. Some Hiri Peng as well. The Naruna Aru Sentinels are getting into position as well. So Mirkwood and Dale are both crossing the bridges, or at least Mirkwood are. This does of course leave the middle of the battlefield potentially open for our own team to advance across, and then in the north I could also advance across the bridges with what's left of my army. So despite the fact that it is going to be pretty difficult to stop a Mirkwood advance here in the south, right next to our stronghold as well, we could make this play to our advantage as well with the limited resources they've got elsewhere. There's a lot of ranged firepower moving. You can see my army in the north there, the Greens, are advancing across the bridges, but now we will see an engagement. Now the Maitha Ilazgal are not going to have the easiest shot. In fact, I think they are just going to have to charge right on in to melee, or at least try and get to the side before they start using their javelins. But the Castamir's Legion should be able to hold against Thrandrami Erin. Both of these units, it's a little bit more debatable, but I do think that Umbar have got the resources here to hold Mirkwood at bay, at least while we try and make it work for us in other areas of the map. Thrandrami Erin initially having some success here against the Castamir's Legion, which speaks to how highly skilled the Elven Spears really are. But the Naruna Aru Royal Guard are getting into a fantastic position to shoot into their backs. Dale are advancing across the bridge, the final bridge over here. But once again, Umbar are getting ready to hold this one as well. Corsair Pikemen and Castamir's Legion. Obviously Dale less skilled on average than the Mirkwood units, but they sort of fight fire with fire when it comes to Umbar. Both factions are pretty heavily reliant on their armour values and their defensive nature. So it's going to be a real grind between the two infantry units on that bridge in particular. But Mirkwood here are doing really well against the Castamir's Legion, better than I gave them credit for. At this point though, I am now starting to advance across the bridges in the north. Kind of necessary, because if we just let that fight go on in the south without any sort of answer, we would probably be overwhelmed eventually. We can see over here the Hiri Alth taking some fire from the Variag mercenaries and my Carmel shadow bows on the bridges. But this is going to be a bit of a sticky situation for me. The Loka Flagrim are of course not going to be able to defeat the Hiri Alth. This is where Rune's armour-piercing nature comes back to bite them a little bit. Mirkwood's heavier emphasis on skill is going to serve them very well. And the Thurney Tower over here. So this is going to be a real nightmare for me to try and push through here. But once again, as with Cardlin, I felt like I didn't really have much of a choice. Looking at what was happening elsewhere on the battlefield, I wanted to make moves to try and stretch the enemy a little bit, because if we let Mirkwood do what they wanted to in the south, we would have been in real trouble with regards to our stronghold being right there, I feel. I do have my cavalry, however, and this could be a real problem for them, charging there into the Hirialth, doing some nice damage. I've also got my exhausted Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Now, I do have a problem with regards to the Royak bin Ammon Lank. They, of course, are spear cavalry, very heavily skilled spear cavalry at that, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky for my knights, and in particular my multiple HP lancers, to get the value that I wanted off of them. Going to charge into those Hirialth over there. This might be the end for my Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Both my units of archers that I've got left are trying to shoot the Royak bin down, because of course they are very bad at dealing with ranged fire. And then we can see the Kabul's Dragon Knights cycling around the back. Let's go and see what's happening down here. We can see that the Earls of Dale are being accosted by the Haradrim forces over here. The Black Serpents. What is going on down here? And I believe the assault has been thrown off. So yeah, Mirkwood and Dale, their initial assaults have not gone all that well. The Corsair Pikemen and the Casimir's Legion working really nicely in tandem. And ultimately the Thrandrami Erin have been broken. The Casimir's Legion, despite having a bit of a rocky start, have been successful in repelling this attack. So let's go back up to the north and see what's going on. There are numerous holes opening up. We can see that the Variag mercenaries have chased the enemy a little bit too far, though. They're obviously going to be cut down by the Hirialth. Now I do have my Flag Rim, but most importantly I do have my Dragon's Wrath crossbows and my Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen somewhere, although my Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen, I wasn't able to use their javelins on the bridge, so I decided to just charge them in because they would fare a little bit better. There goes Thranduil. They would fare a little bit better in melee, but ultimately they are still being cut down in their prime, as it were. My Carmel's Dragon Knights did a lot of damage to the Royal Court of House Durondor, but that was also returned in kind, thanks to the Maethyr Las-Gellan. You can see here that these javelins proving to be a real nightmare. My Dragon Knights are really proving to be little more than a distraction for all of the enemy ranged units and cavalry. Unfortunately, I didn't really have the resources remaining from my fight with Cardland in the early game to really make this assault stick. And ultimately, too many of, well, my allies were also very much occupied in the south with defending our stronghold, so ultimately I wasn't really able to get much in the way of support quickly enough. And really, again, this comes down to me being completely impatient and just attacking too quickly. WK does have his Mumakil and his Southron Warband over here, and Mumakil again is such a potent threat in this sort of situation. You can see there the Dragon's Wrath Crossmen firing their shots high into the sky, which is unfortunate. Again, the Hirialth are just too strong for my Loke Flag Rim. But the Black Serpents are over here giving me a hand. So WK is over here helping me out, but ultimately I feel as though, again, if I'd waited a little bit longer, we would have maybe been in a stronger position going on forwards. Patience is a virtue. The Dragon's Wrath Warlords charging around. Amazingly, however, you can see that my my Warlord himself is still alive. My Carmel's Dragon Knights, despite the fact that they were surrounded by Royak bin Ammon Lank and Maethyr Las-Gellan, still able to withstand it. And my general's still alive, amazingly. It goes to show how durable the Carmel's Dragon Knights really are. The Royak bin charging into the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesmen, doing some nice damage to them, but there are Southron Warband in here, and they're going to be supported by my archers. Let's go and see what's happening down here in the south. Not much by the looks of things. Looks as though both sides are sort of posturing off against one another. Let's see what's happening over here. At this point, honestly, the enemy stronghold is in more danger than ours, because up here their defences are looking a little bit sparse. Those Mumakil are running amok, however, which is a real shame. If those Mumakil had stayed under control, I would have fancied our chances of taking this town centre, honestly, because there would have been very little stopping them. However, now that they're running amok, we're in a little bit of trouble. The Black Serpents dealing with the Thurney Tower. The Thurney Tower were really what made this assault a bit of a doomed endeavour from the start. They were able to skirmish down my forces as they crossed the bridge, and Medieval 2 bridges are notoriously awkward to use. I'm trying to cover my Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen with what remains of my Flag Rim, and hopefully what remains of WK's Haradrim Spearmen, because if we can keep the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen here, they of course represent a big amount of damage that we can do. Sin is also up here in the north now with some Numenorian Lancers, so this has now become a joint endeavour. Again, if I'd waited just a little bit longer... Oh, hello. Looks as though these Royak been charged through these stakes, which is good news for us. The Miniscarithan sharpshooter, so the Cardland garrison force is trying to do their best to bring down the Black Serpents, but they are now surrounded by cavalry and armor-piercing spears, which might be enough to bring them down. Again, looking back on this, if I had waited just a little bit longer, this assault might well have been enough to win us the game. But as it is, what it is doing is stretching things, and you can see back there that Dale and Mirkwood are now in full retreat towards their own stronghold to try and stop this attack, because without reinforcements we could win this at this point in time. Now obviously the eagle-eyed among you will notice that this fight goes on for a little bit longer yet, so this assault itself is not going to be enough to quickly take the town centre away from the enemy. You can see the second unit of Mumakil is now heading over here as well. And this Mumakil has reformed, so this is good news. And while we may have lost my cavalry, this unit of Númenórean Lancers is going to be really difficult to slow down, obviously very dangerous once they get moving. And you can see now that Mirkwood are being forced into a full retreat towards their stronghold. There's not much of my forces left, you can pretty much condense them into this little area over here. Some Variag mercenaries, some Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen and some Loke Flagrim dealing with what remains of the Hiri Youth. But really the most significant unit I have left, I've got my general there, still running around without his unit now. But the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen are obviously the most significant asset that I still have remaining. They're capable of flattening an entire unit if they get a pretty good shot off. And over there in the background we can see the Mumakil dealing with what remains of that unit of Earls. And now we are heading towards the enemy stronghold. It is worth saying as well that we wouldn't have been able, even if we had taken the stronghold quickly, the 2 minutes would not have passed by the time those enemy reinforcements had descended upon us. But we do still have some very powerful units to fight our way through. The Tharbad Warhammers are of course going to be a real problem in melee. But you can see here that these Númenórean Lancers, again, doing some very nice damage to the Maegr Irlas Gelen, taking away those armor-piercing projectiles. WK still charging forward. You can see my general still charging around all on his lonesome. I think he's going to just sort of get into the Thurney Tower and try and disrupt their firing. But we definitely need the Mumakil. We definitely need the Dragon's Wrath crossbows to do a lot of heavy lifting over here, and the Harajan Spearmen, because in melee we really don't have anything that's going to be able to stand up to the Tharbad Warhammers, and there is of course the Hetherley Tower over here as well, which again is going to be difficult to cut our way through. You can see down here what remains of, well, there's again, WK is in a similar situation to me. Only our generals remain. At least I think this is the Harad general, is it? Yes indeed. Only our generals remain in our general's bodyguard units. And well, there he goes. But just trying to sort of prevent Dale from reinforcing their stronghold as quickly as they are able to. And over here you can see that my general will probably suffer a similar fate soon enough. The Carmel's Dragon Knights are a little bit tougher on average than the Black Serpents. Just trying to do his best, running around in circles. You can see obviously here the Tharbad Warhammers are crushing the Southron Warband, but my Dragon's Wrath crossbows are moving into position, trying to get a nice shot off. The Númenórean Lancers from Sin have also taken some pretty grievous losses at this point, so our attack is unfortunately running out of steam. We could have really done with that Mumakil being able to move. Flagrim. I've also got my Shadow Bows, my Sapphire Bladesmen, the battered remnants of my army at this point. Dragon's Wrath crossbow is going to try and get some shots off. Unfortunately, the Dragon's Wrath crossbows in the past have proven themselves to be very temperamental in when they would be willing to shoot and when they wouldn't be. Crossbows in general are a little bit slower at firing, of course, but... So this is it. I'm going to get one shot off, unfortunately, before they are engaged in melee. And it was a little bit tame, a little bit disappointing, to be honest with you. So really our last hope for taking the stronghold now has kind of disappeared with that. My Dragon's Wrath crossbow needed a fully effective firing into those Tharbad Warhammers and Hetherley Tower to really cut them down to size. And then we could have maybe done the rest with our scattered and disparate forces. There goes my general. He's gone through a lot, to be fair, though. He definitely more than paid for himself during this fight for me. Númenórean Lancers. Again, we're doing our best, but at this point we can't really hope for this assault to accomplish much. At this point, maybe it would have been a good idea for our team to get together and decide to do a full retreat to try and save what we could. But as it is, we're just trying to do as much damage as we can. The Thurney Tower taking more damage from these Numenorians. The Hetherley Tower, of course. We have done a decent amount of damage, to be fair, in this assault, but ultimately my army has been put fully out of commission by this point. Of all the armies on the field, mine was the first to die. And most of it came down to my impatience, both times, in the trees and advancing over the river. If I had waited a little bit longer, things would have gone much, much more smoothly in my mind. I've still got my shadow bows over here, of course, body-piercing projectiles firing into that clump over there. But the volume of fire isn't really there to do significant damage anymore. But again, trying to do what I can, chipping in when and where I can. Trying to see, so they've got 2 units of Hetherley Tower, a unit of Maith Ilasgallen and the Tharbad Warhammers up here. Dale is on their way back now, as well as Mirkwood, but ultimately that was kind of unnecessary in the end. They would have been necessary if we had actually successfully taken the stronghold, because then of course the 2-minute timer would have started and they would have had to try and retake it. But as it is, they were able to throw us off without that, mainly because of the unfortunate loss of my Dragon's Wrath crossbows, and also the fact that I'm not sure if WK realised that this Mumakil had reformed, but at this point the Hiri Pang are starting to shoot them again, and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers are getting into position, because if we had that Mumakil, and if we had that, if my Dragon's Wrath crossbows had actually done their job and got a few nice volleys off without sort of dithering around refusing to shoot, we could have had a little bit more luck, but ultimately I don't think we would have been able to hold the stronghold with the resources we had over here, because of course the full force of Dale and Mirkwood were on their way back at this point. And now you can see over here that Umbar are moving into position. They're moving backwards to defend our own stronghold, so at this point, interesting like ceasefire, as it were. There goes the last Mumakil. So now there are no fights going on in any part of the map, and it's going to be a case of each side regrouping and then deciding what to do. Now, I think we were behind in terms of the kills at this point. No, we weren't. We were actually winning in terms of the percentage of kills, but having said that, the enemy do still have an army advantage over us at this point. Myself and WK have taken a lot of losses at this point. My army is almost completely destroyed. I think I've only got 1 unit of 3 clansmen left. WK does have more than that, but ultimately all of our hopes are going to be pinned on Sin's Umbar force, and he's going to have to take on a combination of mainly Dale and Mirkwood. Cardland do still have their Tharbad Warhammers, but that's about it for them as well. But now it's time to make a cut, because obviously there's a big lull in proceedings while Dale, Mirkwood and what's left of Cardland advance into a position where they could lay an assault onto our stronghold, while Sin sets up a primarily Umbar defence with a little bit of Haradrim support. So there will be a bit of a lengthy cut actually. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a 10,000 frame gap that you're going to see at this point, but we will rejoin when the action becomes a little bit more relevant again. So indeed we are within the final 10,000 frames, and you can see here that Sin has set up a very comprehensive defence, and you may be wondering why it was that we didn't want to attack, considering we do technically have a manpower advantage, and that was because our skirmish force had been completely gutted. Mirkwood and Dale still have a lot of archers left, and if we advanced on their town centre we would have been shot to pieces. So sort of forming up around our own stronghold and trying to absorb that sort of pressure is really the only thing we had going for us at this point in time. And also there is the fact, of course, that Mirkwood in general are going to be a pretty difficult foe to face in this sort of situation, when Umbar have got a lot of troops which can go toe-to-toe with them, but not nearly enough to the extent that we need at this point in time. So while we may have a manpower advantage in terms of quality, the ball is very much in their court. Mirkwood's men should be enough to actually see them victorious in terms of just from a pure combat perspective, so we're going to have to get a little bit tricksy with what we want to do here, and this comes mainly in the form of WK doing some very interesting things. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see them per se. I think that they are hidden to me as well as the enemy, but there is a unit of Southron pikemen hidden in the trees over here, which when they are fully committed to their assault on our stronghold will come around from behind. Indeed there they are. They will come around from behind and attack them from the rear, hopefully disrupting their skirmishers, but the main thing that we have is over here somewhere. which is this unit of Trollmen. Now, I did have a unit of 3 clansmen which were hidden up here, but they were actually run down by a unit of Earls of Dale. But you can see that all of Mirkwood's forces are now vacating their stronghold, which means eventually, hopefully, if our front line can last long enough, if our stronghold can withstand the enemy assault for long enough, this unit of Trollmen will be able to take the enemy stronghold and be able to secure victory for us. That's going to be what we're going to be pinning our hopes on. Because in terms of, from a pure combat perspective, we don't really stand much of a chance here. Mirkwood's missile troops are going to be far too strong. They're going to be able to weaken Sin's front line too much. And then in melee, from a pure melee perspective as well, the elves, when they're backed up by Dale especially, with Dale's pretty comprehensive skirmish line, we're going to be in a lot of trouble back here. Sin does still have his Warlords of Umbar, which can still be a real pain, but one unit of Knights alone is not going to be able to sort of reverse our fortunes over here. They're going to have to hold the line as long as possible and hope that WK can do the business on the other side of the map. Now, we are in the somewhat fortunate position that Umbar can absorb skirmish fire a little bit better than most, but we do still have a lot of Corsair pikemen and most of WK's forces left as Southrons, which don't do so well under arrow fire. Dale dragging their heels a little bit, but they're on the way now. And then what's the only remaining unit from Cardland, the Tharbad Warhammers here as well, which honestly could well prove to be a match winner in this sort of situation. The Warhammers are exceptionally good against more heavily armoured forces, and of course that's where the vast bulk of Umbar's strength lies at this point in the battlefield. Casimir's Legion, Naru Naaru Sentinels and Royal Guard. You can see that this is our fate thus far, to be skirmished. Of course I have no, my contributions to this battlefield are gone. All of the green triangles from the battle have been wiped from the face of existence. Mirkwood doing a real number on Rune. It is worth saying as well that normally Rune are able to accent their armour-piercing focused elites with a lot of disposable numbers, but not so in this situation. In this sort of game mode where you're very limited with the amount of men you can bring, Rune's armour-piercing becomes less of an additional strength and more their primary focus, and you need to use it to its fullest extent. Against Mirkwood, obviously, that's very, very difficult. See, obviously, the Corsair Blackguards are still over here with their armour-piercing javelins. Going to send the Tharbad Warhammers retreating very, very quickly. Throwing a volley of javelins there into the Tharbad Warhammers, getting a few of them as well. Killing off a few of them. A real boon. This is the closing stages of the fight, however, so this is going to be it. This is all or nothing now for the red team. Some hidden units as well. Hidden units of crossbow Corsairs and Corsair Blackguards. There's a lot of armor-piercing missiles, a lot of close-range punch from Umbar here, but as soon as they reveal themselves, the crossbow Corsairs in particular will get torn apart by the Mirkwood and Dalian skirmishers. Still some Earls running around. And obviously the long-range skirmish advantage is really proving to be a little bit punishing here so far. You can see up on this little hill we have the Hiri Peng, which are going to get a nice field of fire. But now we shall see how well this defensive line holds up to a Mirkwood assault. Sin also reveals his Castamir's Rangers. Again, when they reveal themselves, that's not going to do too well under the fire from the Dalian skirmish line, who themselves have revealed their own Athala Rangers at this point in time. It's a very comprehensive defensive line, but ultimately the ranged firepower that we're coming up against is going to be very difficult to reconcile. And there is, of course, the fact that the Mirkwood army in general is going to be very highly skilled. So a lot of these pole arms on the front line are going to try and hold their ground. The Hetherley Tower are moving in. Tharbad Warhammers are going to reinforce them, so this is an assault from the front. Once again, however, Dale are unfortunately lagging behind their allies in terms of moving forward, because they really needed to move forward at the same time to attack from all angles. And then the stronghold might be in some real danger. Again, you're going to take casualties in this situation, that's unavoidable, you just need to take it on the chin. In this battle I was kind of the opposite extreme, where I took it on the chin a little bit too much. These Hiri Peng are now attacking, but the Southron pikemen, revealing themselves from the trees on the high ground over there, going to attack from behind and interrupt their firing. Trying to stop the enemy archers at this point. is going to be our best hope for holding out as long as we possibly can. And this unit of Castamir's Legion should do a decent job at holding. But ultimately,
The enemy badly. They have only half their men left.
while this frontal assault is kind of going not as well as they would have hoped, I'm really surprised at this point in time that Dale are not moving forward. I mean, it's almost criminal how much they're dragging their heels at this point. They needed to move in faster than they did. They should still win this, the red team, but they're not going to win it as quickly as they should have, and speed is of the essence here, because as I'm sure that you've noticed from the minimap, this unit of trollmen is sprinting towards the enemy stronghold, and if we capture the enemy stronghold before they capture ours, we win. And that's what it's come down to, really. The red team need to take our stronghold before this unit of trollmen reaches theirs. And that's what's ultimately going to decide this fight. Speed is of the essence, because they will win this, the red team, as I've said multiple times now. They simply have too many elite units, too many units of genuine quality for us to stop for too much longer. Because a lot of our forces are skirmishers that are out of ammunition, or basic pikes. The only really elite unit we have left at holding the line are these Naru Sentinels, and of course, when it comes to pikes, they can easily be circumvented. These Starbad Warhammers destroying the Corsairs. Now, we do have the Warlords, but the Warlords are also being focused down by the Dalian Skirmishers. The Thala Rangers, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers in particular, are going to deal incredible amounts of damage to the Warlords, so if the enemy didn't have such a heavy skirmish presence, then yes, the Warlords would probably be enough to help tilt this fight in our favour. But as it is, they're taking so much fire that it's going to be too late for them to do much of anything. And you can see over here the Elves of Esgaroth, the Morroquendi Pikes dealing with the Corsair Blackguards. The Dalian General is still alive, and these crossbow Corsairs are being destroyed. Now, it is worth saying that our forces are still defending our town centre. So ultimately this unit of Earls will not count as taking it. You can see actually, I think that it's within these stakes, so technically speaking, these crossbow Corsairs could be the only unit which is defending our town centre for us. So Dale have the opportunity here to take the town centre. One player bit of defeat. I think that was Grimgore. Yes, it was. I didn't actually admit defeat yet because I simply had neglected to do so. These Corsair Blackguards, those Warlords are taking a lot of damage, and you can see now that these Elves of Esgaroth surrounding us. Sin's brave men of Umbar just need to hold out for a little bit longer. You can see the blue triangle creeping towards the enemy town centre, which I'm just going to refer to it as town centre to be fair. It fulfills exactly the same functionality really. This Dalian skirmish line is proving to be a real problem. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers as well, the Elves of Esgaroth. In the late game, Dale had a lot of manpower left over. Now these Castamir's Rangers, trying to respond in kind. And you can see actually there, up on the hill, the Castamir's Legion and the Southron Pikemen are victorious. They now need to get down here as quickly as they possibly can to help reinforce this front line. Our Pharazon is still alive, the only one of our forces the only one of our generals that still is. The Earls, again, they should have victory over here in combination with all of that bow fire that's coming in. But we are still clinging on to our town centre for dear life. Because again, if it came down to just purely, one team trying to wipe out the other, we would have already lost this battle. It's very clear that we're going to lose, but that isn't the point of this game mode. The whole point behind these strongholds / town centres is that there is a more tactical aspect to it, and ultimately these Naru Sentinels are holding out for a long time. Those Warlords as well, continuing to disrupt the Dalian skirmish line, which they need if they're going to kill off these pikes as quickly as they possibly can. These crossbow Corsairs are still alive as well. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers will be able to defeat all of these Haradrim forces. The Corsairs are also over here. Defeat seems certain. Again, they're going up against Girions, Paladins and Earls of Esgaroth, and their formation has been buckled. Still, the missile fire comes raining in from the Dalian skirmish line. However, this is going to be it. You can see here the WK's Trollmen of Harad They're going to charge across, and they are going to take the enemy stronghold unopposed, which of course means our 2-minute timer will start before theirs. And the beauty of this, of course, is that they do not have any cavalry remaining. Now, I say they're going to take it unopposed. They aren't. There is a unit of 10 Hetherley Tower over here, which are going to slow the process somewhat. But of course, this is a unit of Trollmen, so the Hetherley Tower don't stand a chance against one of the best units Harad can field. Especially not when they are outnumbered. There goes the Dalian General, at the hands of our Pharazon as well. A duel between the generals there. I think I know what my screenshot will be when I go back and try and take one. But you can see here that these crossbows are hanging on for dear life. It's actually going to be real close. And there goes the final unit of Hatherley Tower. So we have taken the enemy stronghold before they have taken ours. And of course now they really don't have any cavalry that can come to contest the point with us. So we have taken their stronghold first, which of course means our 2-minute timer has started first, which means we will win this fight. There goes the Umbar General. But at this point, it really doesn't matter. Speed was of the essence, and it just goes to show if Dale had just been that little bit quicker, if they had joined with Mirkwood and, well, the one unit that Cardland had left in that attack, they probably would have taken our town centre before we had taken theirs. And that ultimately was the difference between victory and defeat in this battle. There is 1,000 frames left, but nothing happens. I mean, Dale start running towards the enemy town, well, their town centre, but the 2 minutes were up before they would even get there. And of course there is still a few Umbar units, so we may as well skip to the end. So we managed to take the enemy town centre before they took ours, and that was the difference between victory and defeat. And this really was the, in terms of how this battle went and how we won,
that makes us the victors for today.
And how we won is kind of the perfect showcase of how Conquest will work. You cannot just assume that defeating all of the enemy units on the map will give you victory. You need to defend your point, and you need to defend it well. And again, I feel as though certainly I was the weak link on our team. I feel as though if I had been just a little bit more patient in the trees and at crossing the bridges, we would have been able to mount a much more comprehensive first attack on the enemy stronghold, and that would have given them much more pause for thought and probably would have ended in our victory being a little bit more comprehensive. So ultimately I did let the side down a little bit there. Obviously the loss of the Champions of Nafarat and the Demons of the Desert so early was a real shame for us as well, because they're really powerful units which would have helped us a lot in the late game. And I feel as though Dale as well, you know, Dale could have been a little bit more effective for their team as well. They lost units early on, but more importantly, in that final assault, it was their decision to hang back a little bit more and try and preserve the lives of their own men, I feel, which ultimately ended up handing the game to us. It was very, very close, though. I mean, it was literally I think in real time, it was a difference of like 10 to 20 seconds between us taking their town centre and them taking ours. So, very, very close, obviously. I'll have a look at my statistics to see which one of my units were the best. And it was my Shadow Guard, it was my shock infantry that did the damage. Obviously, they absolutely laid waste to most of Cardland's infantry. Even the Dunedain captains were put to the sword by them, so that's very good. The Dragon's Wrath Warlords obviously did a lot of rear damage as well. I was very impressed with how survivable the Carmel's Dragon Knights were under extreme pressure from anti-cavalry units. And then elsewhere, really it was just a sort of even sort of kill count that my units got. But yeah, this is the first Battle of Conquest that I've shown. I hope to be able to show more of them in the future. Obviously, it's a little bit new for me, so covering it is a little bit more stuttery than it was, obviously. At least I was in this fight, though. In my most recent video, someone did ask me why I'm never in my own videos, but this one I am. And I was by far and away the worst player on our team, so there we go. But yeah, Conquest is a new mode which hopefully will be popular, because I do feel as though it adds more to the meta, which I feel as though Reforged at this point desperately needs, because otherwise the games are going to become very samey and the meta is going to become sort of the be all and end all. But this is going to inject new life into the game, I hope. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think of this new game mode. I'm sure people will be eager to hear feedback, and I hope to be able to show more of it in the future. I think the next one that I'm going to show will be a scenario though, so look forward to that as well. Hope you enjoyed this, a new game mode, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.